many of you have been to Australia? The Rays, yes, okay. Well, I think I know everybody who's been. Great. Well, just by way of background, Australia is not a small country, so if you're thinking of taking a 3 or 4 day second honeymoon and checking out the whole place, it's not going to happen in 3 or 4 days. It's the size of the lower 48 states, so plan on a good 2 weeks if you want to even get a taste of everything. As you can tell here from the climate map, there's a diversity of climates, and we're not going to the middle of the country where it's very desert-like. Nobody's really out there except for the mining industry, the ranching industry, and the Aboriginals on their tribal grounds. Unfortunately for my wife, who is from the communist state of New York, we're not going to the southern part of the country where she's praying that God will eventually call us and direct us down near the Southern Alps. And we're not even actually going to the temperate zones that look something like the Midwest. Rather, we're going to the tropical North Queensland, and we have all the tropical amenities. So it's just a way of life that you just don't go swimming before you check out the pond. We are going to North Queensland, and fortunately, there's not 50 states to memorize or 48. It's just 8, and you'll see it right there in the upper right-hand quadrant. So we're going to be in A. I know it's a lousy screenshot from Google Maps, but you get the idea that B is Sydney. And how far away do you think that is? 600 miles, 700, 8, 9, 1,400? Yes, 1,350. So on their road system, that's 28 hours of driving time. If you do it nonstop, if you add in stops like we do, it's definitely longer. But we're going to North Queensland not because we have a special vision, per se, out of the blue. We have been directed through a series of providential circumstances to work with Tracy and Debbie Minnick, who've been there now 29 years. And about 45 minutes up the road, they have some coworkers, the Jaworskis, that have been there 39 years. So basically, we are entering into a second generation of mission work in that particular part of the country. And not coincidentally, we're all at the same mission board, GFA Missions. So the question is, why are we going there? And to answer that question, I like to ask this question first. What does the Great Commission include? What does it include besides the very obvious part of the going into all the world? The proclaiming of the gospel, that's clearly part of missions. The making and baptizing of true disciples of Jesus Christ. And the major step of planting new churches. If a missionary does all those steps, and that every one of those steps is a major miracle, a series of miracles. But this may take him several decades to get this far to plant one church. If he does all that, is he done? Can he say, you know what, I've fulfilled, I've obeyed every step of the Great Commission? Well, the only way to answer that question is to look at the text, right? We are text-bound Christians. And this is an older translation, but I've put some of it in brackets to modernize it. The text is Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Go ye therefore and teach or make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And then what's the part of the Great Commission that we don't really associate with missions per se? The teaching them to observe all things whatsoever Christ commanded us. So, missionaries, being the human beings that they are, with the finite mortal bodies that they have, are going to eventually wear out, right? They're going to have to retire, they're going to die, they're going to have to come back to take care of aging parents. They have all the needs and problems that you have here in America, right? So who continues the teaching aspect of the Great Commission after the missionary packs up and leaves or is buried? Well, for some people, the answer is to come back to America, to churches like this, and put out a call for more American missionaries to go to that very same place and to take over the works. And you know, there is a place for that in parts of the world, for that to happen. But the question is that the divine ideal for Americans alone to be obeying the Great Commission and to be pastoring churches all around the world? Well, you know that American Christianity is only 1,700 years later into the game, and so clearly there had to be people that were doing this before there were Christians in America, so obviously that's not the final solution, just to send Americans everywhere. No. The answer is for nationals or local believers in every country, for them to obey the Great Commission too. So I want to discuss for the remainder of our time this morning why missionaries bother to invest in training men, and primarily, but also women, for ministry on the mission field. Why would missionaries take time away from evangelizing, from discipling, from pastoring churches and planting new ones? Why would they take time from those vital and central aspects of missions to invest in training men in that country to be pastors and evangelists and missionaries? Well, we're not going to have time to cover my 16 reasons this morning. We'll just probably get through one, okay? But the reason why they do it is because we believe, and many missionaries have come to this realization, that the national is superior in his ability to evangelize and edify people in his own country. You say, well, how does that work? I mean, I feel like, you know, we send out some very well-prepared missionaries in our circles. They might have degrees in linguistics or ethnology or sociology, plus a lot of Bible training. I mean, these are really well-educated people. They're really healthy. We have so many programs in place to help missionaries before they ever get to the field. So why isn't the American better at reaching people than the people of that country? Why are Christians in Togo that were born there and raised there better at reaching unsaved people in Togo than the American missionary? Why in Australia are Australians with a high school education better suited to reach Australians than I, as an American with a tertiary degree? Well, the first issue is obviously language, right? All around the world, people understand their local language better than the outsider. You say, well, I don't understand. I mean, you're going to Australia, they speak English, you speak English, so you should have no trouble communicating in Australia. Right. Okay, so tell me what this means. Bring me a torch. Let's look under the bonnet and see if she carked it. Now, if you've been to Australia recently, don't answer. Some of this is pretty obvious from the context. The torch is the what? Flashlight. The bonnet is the hood, and carked it means? What's that? Died. Very good. So carked is probably from what word? Carcass. Good. That was pretty easy. How about this one? Macca's is Chaka's tonight. Who or what is Macca's? Well, if it's pronounced it's probably spelled So Macca's is really Mackers. Mackers is where they sell Big Macs. So McDonald's is what? How many of you have a grandmother that used to say that something was chock-a-block full? It was overwhelmingly brimming over the top. Yes. Okay, so they took chock-a-block full and they smashed it down to Chaka's. So McDonald's is busy tonight. Let's go to Hungry Jack's. That's Burger King. Now, why are you guys going to be standing in a long line at McDonald's tonight instead of with me in a short line at Burger King? It's because you don't, number one, like Burger King, and number two, you don't know the local dialect, right? Yeah, you see, they speak a dialect of English, but they don't speak our American English, and they certainly don't speak are subdialect of Southern Californian American English. Right? You know you have a dialect here, a subdialect of a subdialect of a subdialect? Yeah. Yeah, so what is the second person personal pronoun in the plural in Southern California? Dude, it's like, what's a pronoun, okay? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to spell it for you, and you tell me how you pronounce it. It's spelled Y-O-U. How do you say that in the plural in Southern California? You guys? I hear it, you guys. Who votes for you guys? Who says just plain you? Okay, who goes for, is there anything else that's used here? You all? Yeah, okay. Yeah, y'all. Now, I grew up in South Carolina, and most people think that in South Carolina, the second person plural personal pronoun is y'all. That is half true, okay? There is actually an emphatic form of that communicates very well what, yeah, you know what it is? It's all y'all. All y'all better get out of my yard before I shoot. Okay? There are regional isms, and in Australia there's things worse than just subdialects. There's something called rhyming slang. That's where they take a pair of words, and the second word of the pair rhymes with something that makes sense in the context. So you see how good you are at it. The Seppo took his trouble and strife on the Frog and Toad for a Captain Cook at Steak and Kidney. That's not the Outback, no. Well, I have to help you with Seppo because they took the pair of words and they chopped it down. So you're not going to get that one. But you have meanings in your mind, right, for trouble, for strife, for frogs and toads. Hopefully you remember who Captain Cook is, and you may have heard of the meal Steak and Kidney. I never think I ate that, but I think it was an older generation thing, right? So, Seppo is from the words septic tank. Tank rhymes with yank. All Americans, no matter if you're born in Texas, Alabama, Mississippi, or Georgia, are Yankees. Now, that is a barbaric understanding of American history, but that is the honest truth. We are all Yanks or Yankees to them. Okay, so the American took his trouble and strife. Strife rhymes with. See, every church there's somebody who thinks of that immediately, and you just got to wonder. Yes, strife rhymes with wife. On the Frog and Toad, Toad rhymes with road. Oh, you guys are great. For a Captain Cook, Cook rhymes with look at what famous city? Sydney. Now, how many of you had that meaning in mind when I put this up? Oh, yes, the genius is on the second row. Right, right. Now, why didn't you get that? Because you aren't from there. Now, the question is, how important is communication in ministry? What did Paul say in 1 Corinthians 14? He said that in the church, he would rather speak 5 words that he understood with his understanding, so that by his voice, with those 5 words, he might teach other people also, rather than speaking 10,000 words in a language that neither he nor his hearers understood. So according to Paul, 5 is greater than 10,000. Now, I know we have some engineers in the room, and they're probably able to do this kind of math. So if we divide both sides by 5, it's a 1 to 2,000 ratio, right? And if we want to put that in a percentage, is Paul saying that one well-understood ministry, understood word in ministry is 2,000% better? Is it just 2,000% if we put it in a percentage? No, it's much better than that. It's 200,000% better than one unknown word. So for that reason alone, the national on any field is always going to be superior than the foreign missionary in evangelizing in edifying his countrymen. So my question to you is, who is best suited to evangelize and edify the people of Southern California? Some guy from South Carolina who showed up Thursday? Or people who grew up in Southern California and have lived there their whole lives, gone to these schools, spoken this dialect, and not only know the language, they have all these personal contacts in the community. Well, clearly, the person best suited for ministry in this context is not the outsider, it's the insider. And some of you, by virtue of birth, others by virtue of length of age and moving in here, are well suited for ministry in these parts. But you know, missionaries can actually go to language school and pick up language. And if they have linguistic ability, they can eventually do well. So language actually isn't the most difficult part for a missionary, though he'll always struggle with it. The most difficult part for a missionary to overcome is understanding the local culture. You say, well, what does that look like? I've always lived in this culture and I don't know what you're really getting at. Okay, well, when a missionary goes somewhere around the world, he steps off the airplane and he sees and hears and smells things that he's never seen, heard, or smelled before. And because he is an ambassador of Christ, because he is a moral being, he must make moral judgments about those things. He's got to decide, is this thing that I'm seeing, is this a bad thing that Christians should never partake in? Is it a good thing that Christians should always partake in? Or is it something in between there where maybe there are times at certain stages of life or maturity we could partake of, but not for others? You try it out. Get off the plane in Australia and you see this sign. And you got to decide, now, is that a good place? Is that a bad place? Is that one of those in-between sorts of places? You say, well, you know, looking at the colors, this isn't your typical independent, Orthodox Bible church coloring. The font is not what you'd call ultra-conservative. It's not even conservative, actually. And the word hot can have several negative connotations. So we probably shouldn't even talk about this in Sunday school. I mean, it's really problematic. So some of you are thinking, you know, this is a really evil place. We should not ever go to Hot Mummies. But the fact is that Hot Mummies is just a maternity store. And that we couldn't make an informed moral judgment because we didn't have enough data. We couldn't see enough of the picture. And so our judgment was very hastily made on limited information. And for some of you in this room, Hot Mummies is a perfectly fine place to do some of your shopping, provided that it doesn't blow your budget, right? For others of us, it's never going to be really appropriate for us to spend a lot of time in Hot Mummies by virtue of our gender and our clothing taste. It's just not going to work. So there you have it. Now, as you can tell, maternity stores are not a complex issue. There are actually a lot more complex things in culture to deal with that missionaries spend decades trying to figure out the right answer to. What does the Bible say about this particular thing? So, how many of you have heard of the song, Waltzing Matilda? Yes. Somebody briefly explain to the rest of us, what is the gist, what is the basic storyline of this song that is more well-known in Australia than the Australian national anthem? Waltzing Matilda, if you go to YouTube and look at the 2000 Olympics, was sung at the closing ceremony, and there were 100,000 Australians crying their eyes out over this. Now, part of it is that they were half drunk. Okay? That's a given. But what explains the rest of them all feeling a camaraderie, a kinship in this particular ballad, folk song, we might say. So someone tell us what the storyline is, and then let's think about that storyline and the implications of the value of the societies in Australia. Anybody want to give it a shot? Oh, let me put a picture up. Maybe that'll help you. Okay, the gist of the story is that in Australia they have these guys that we would call hobos, but they call them swagmen, and they would travel the country and basically be starving to death, and so they would take every opportunity to find free or nearly free food. And in this case, he is in the bush, and he's making camp for the night, and as he's boiling his pot of water to make tea, he sees in the bushes, coming down out of the bushes to this watering hole he's camped at, a young sheep. It's not his sheep, but he's very hungry, and nobody else is around, so he takes that sheep, catches it, cuts it up, and sticks it in his food or tucker bag. And just as he's finishing up that butchering process, down from the hills come 3 policemen and the owner of the sheep. So, rather than give himself up to the policeman and the owner and go to jail, what do you think the swagman does? He throws himself into this deep watering hole called a billabong, and he drowns himself. Now, for those of you who have never heard the song, you tell me, who do you think is the hero of Waltzing Matilda? How many of you think that surely the sheep owner, he's got to be the hero, because he's got justice now served in his behalf? How many of you think that the 3 policemen are the heroes? How many of you think that the petty thief swagman is the hero? Yes, the hero to all the Australians is this guy. Now, why is this rustler, small-time rustler, considered the hero to a society of 23 million people? It is a penal colony, or it was a penal colony. Yes. So that means that in 1788, 11 shiploads of sailors and soldiers came to settle in Australia. And why did they come in 1788? What happened in 1776 in this continent?
They couldn't offload the prisoners to America.
Yes, there's a state called Georgia that got shut down to those ships. And ever since then, Australians in some parts have had a sense of bitterness toward America. They have other reasons to be bitter, but that is one that is sometimes held up today. So yes, many of those people that are there now descended from petty criminals, and they really were petty criminals. They didn't export murderers and the most heinous sorts of criminals, because remember, back in the 1700s, people were hung pretty commonly for those sorts of crimes. These are people who, in one case, I read a woman stole 12 pounds of butter, and she was 70 years old, and she gets sent 14,000 miles around the world to Australia. I mean, there were children as young as 9 documented as being on that first fleet for crimes of stealing things less than $20. Okay? So why is this guy the hero? Because he resisted the unjust, in their minds, authority. He's not the hero because he butchered somebody else's sheep per se, but he's the hero because he wouldn't be subject to their system of unjust justice. Now, you're looking at me blankly because you are about to go have some coffee, number one, but number two, because you don't identify with that. We do have ballads in our history, right? We do have some folk stories. We have one with a guy on a white horse, and he's got a black mask, and he's got an Indian friend. And what does he ride around the country doing? He catches thieves. He catches murderers. He's the Lone Ranger. And if you watch TV in the 60s and 70s, you know that there's a whole slew of TV shows of good cowboys fighting bad cowboys, right? And we always cheer for and hope for in every episode that the good guys win. But that's not how they would see it down there. So how do I, as a missionary, address these different values? How do I understand these people? I mean, they look like me. A lot of them are Caucasian. A lot of them wear Western clothes. They've got internet speeds of 100 megabytes per second in their house. They drive vehicles just like us. They have white-collar jobs and blue-collar jobs. They're no different in many ways from people in Southern California. In fact, they watch all the same TV shows that you do. But they don't have the same values. How do I minister to them? How do I even understand them? Well, that takes a lifetime, actually, to get into their heads. But the best answer for missionaries is this, is to train Australians to be pastors of Australian churches. Because if an Australian pastor gets up and says, you know what, the eighth commandment does speak to this value that we have in our society. If an Australian pastor gets up and says, you know what, our view of authority isn't quite biblical, Australians can take it from him. But if I get up as the American and I tell them that they're all wrong and that he's really the bad guy and they shouldn't be glorifying him at all, how do you think that's going to go over? Not too well. And you know what? Paul actually did this in the Bible. You may have the scriptures with you, but if you do, there is a book called Titus. And in Titus, Paul writes to Titus to people who actually were very, very not unlike the Australians in some regards. He writes to Titus, in verse 5, he says, "For this reason I left you in Crete," which is where Titus was residing, "that you would set in order what remains, and that you would appoint elders in every city as I directed you." Now, why didn't Paul just say, you know, Titus, you've got so much more biblical knowledge than those local pastors that grew up on Crete. Why don't you just pastor all those churches? Or better yet, Titus, I have an idea. I left you in Crete in order that you would, finish up the stuff that I didn't finish up, and that you would arrange housing accommodations for some preacher boys that I'm sending from Jerusalem. You see, they've grown up in Christian families. They can read Hebrew and Greek, and they play 6 or 7 different musical instruments, and they've studied all kinds of ancient Near Eastern literature, and they know so much more than those Cretans. In fact, Cretans didn't have the greatest reputation in the ancient world. If you look down at verse, where is it? Chapter 1. Verse 12, yeah. A prophet, a poet actually, who grew up on Crete, said of his own countrymen that they are always what? Upstanding, moral citizens, hard workers, and temperate sort of people. No, that's not what he said about them. He said that they, as a culture, of course there's going to be exceptions in every culture, but as a culture, they are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. The answer for addressing those particular cultural sins, in the long run, was for Cretan men to be saved, to be totally transformed by the gospel, which is amazing when you consider the qualifications for elders or pastors in the preceding verses 6 through 9, that Paul didn't dumb down those qualifications. He didn't say, now, you've always had a culture of piracy in Crete, and we're just going to allow a little bit of stealing, because I know that's what you grew up with. No, Paul didn't dumb down the gospel or its demands for holy and righteous living after coming to Christ through grace, through faith. No, he didn't say that. He said, no, these guys are going to be so transformed by the gospel that they're going to get up and be able to speak to the sins of the culture. And not only that, they're going to be able to handle God's word very well. Verse 9 says that they're going to be able, with healthy doctrine, to exhort and refute those who contradict. They're going to be able to handle the word. That was Paul's long-term plan for Crete. And you know what? That's God's long-term plan for Southern California. That in this church, God is going to save Southern Californians. And some of them he's going to call to be pastors. Some of them might be in elementary school right now. But he is going to work in them and transform them. And by the grace of God, they're going to acquire, through the preaching that is done every week here, probably through some sort of Bible college. You have a couple around here, or Bible university. They're going to acquire the ability to handle God's word well and teach with sound doctrine and to refute people who contradict God's word. And they are going to be the best suited to minister to the people of Menifee, and Marietta, and Yucaipa, and all the surrounding places, right? That's God's plan. So we're trying to help missionaries in Australia train Australian men to do this. And by the grace of God, your pastors are going to do this here. Now, what's the big difference between a pastor who's got somebody to train in America and a pastor who's got somebody to train for ministry in Australia? Well, the big difference in America is that you've got a gazillion places you could send them that are orthodox. Now, they may not be all the same shade of denomination. They may have significant theological differences, but you know what? There are probably 50 orthodox places that you could send somebody for training in America. But in Australia, there's not 50 choices. In fact, where we are in North Queensland, there's no choices. So what is to be done in Australia? Well, the missionaries we're going to work with see that there's a long-term necessity of training Australians for ministry. And it all comes back to this. Now, any questions about this? I know it might be kind of new to some of you. For others of you, this is very old, other than the Australian lingo. I really do have other points, and we could go on for 2 hours, but we're not going to, because I'm an American who respects time limits. Any questions about the situation in Titus? Yes?
For those that may not know, can you just elaborate for a minute on what the ministry will look like there?
What ministry looks like in Australia, or for us?
What ministry is gonna look like.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Like I said at the beginning, we're going to go invest our lives in a place where there have already been missionaries for 3 and 4 decades. Okay, so the gospel is going forward there, and it's even going forward through Australians. In Australia, you can go to the public schools and teach religious education classes. Now, I could go and I could teach at 20 of them, right, and make that my full-time ministry. But who should really be teaching religious education classes in Australia? Australian Christians, right? And the church we're going to in Cardwell has maybe 30 people. You're a mega church to them. But they are in 7 different classes every week in front of 100 lost kids. I think the Mennonites do 3, and there are other people in their church do 4. So there's all kinds of evangelism opportunities there. But we'll probably teach one of those, but we're not going to try and take over that ministry. We're going to really focus on a Bible Institute ministry, which in the past, in the 90s, our co-workers for about 9 years had a very small Bible Institute. But the thing of it is, education, as some of you know, takes time and energy. And if you homeschool, you know that's an understatement, right? So missionaries discover that they only have 24 hours in a day, that they have to raise their families to glorify God. They have to spend time with their lost neighbors. They have to prepare multiple sermons or teaching opportunities a week. They have all this going on, and to then cram into that busy life of hospital visitation and funerals and weddings and whatnot, to cram into all that, preparation for college-level work is just nearly impossible. So after 9 years, using correspondence courses and other things, they realized, we're not set up for this. We really need to pray that God will send someone to spearhead this part of our operation. And we are the pitiful, in many ways, answer to their prayers. Seriously. But God uses pitiful people to do his work, and so that shouldn't be surprising. But we know of more qualified and better people, but they are not called, apparently, to go. So we are answering the call, and we are going, and that will be the thrust of our work. But, of course, when you start these sorts of things, there's nothing there. So you start with maybe a Monday night class, and you offer it, and see people come, and you start basic, and you move on from there. And eventually, the 30-year plan is to have a Bible college that will be run by Australians who eventually will not just administrate, but will teach. And whether we outsource them to other places to get further education beyond what we can give them remains to be seen, but that's always part of the possible plans. Yeah. Yes?
How are you getting there as far as a visa and a work visa and mission visa and all that?
Yeah, we're applying when we get close to the minimum income requirement that Australia makes us have to come, because it's a socialized country and they don't want us on their welfare system. When we get to that, which should be shortly, hopefully in the next couple of months, we're applying for a permanent residency visa. And other missionaries have done that. They've got to be sponsored in by a business or organization, such as a church. And the visa situation is always in flux. So there's no guarantees, but it's been done in the recent past, and Lord willing, it'll happen for us too. Yeah, great question. Yes?
Will you have internet service?
Oh, yes, yes.
So will you be able to, even though you might, for outsourcing your teaching, couldn't you bring that in via internet?
Yes, there is, so the question is, could we use distance education? The answer is yes and no. Part of theological education has to be done live, because Paul told Timothy that you've seen not only my doctrine, but you've also seen my life, my interests, my sufferings, my purpose, my work. And a lot of ministry is caught, not just taught. So it works to do some subjects, some ways that way, but you can't just pop in the old DVD and say, here, get your training. It doesn't, in Bible training, it doesn't work to do it solely that way. We can supplement that way, but we can't do everything that way. So yes, we will make use of other gifted teachers. I know that there's someone in this room that has some videos that we would probably use for training. So yes, we can do that, but in a culture where relationships are very important, they're not inclined to listen to somebody they've never met, especially from that country that they consider to be the big brother that knows it all. It would be better if he were Canadian. Yeah. So, it's 10:15 by my timekeeping, so let's pray and be grateful for all the training and opportunities and blessings that we enjoy in this country.